Oh hi, didn't see you there. Welcome to my kitchen. Today we're going to be advancing the scope of human knowledge through bread. As Oprah once said, I love bread. I love bread. So when I heard that there was a community science project focused on using sourdough to learn about global microbe biodiversity, I was like, yeah, sign me up for that. Introducing the Wild Sourdough Project. Run out of the Public Science Lab at North Carolina State University, the Wild Sourdough Project asks community members to make bread for science. I sat down with lab manager Lauren Nichols, a scientist who works on the Wild Sourdough Project, to learn a little bit more about the project and how community members like you and me can contribute.
My name is Lauren Nichols, and I'm an ecologist who studies the intersection of the ecological world and human worlds. And there's a lot of overlap there, obviously. I love sourdough. Sourdough is delicious. I make sourdough because I'm intrigued by the ecosystem of it. I like dealing with the questions that I'm really interested in, which is sort of this looking at sourdough starters as an ecosystem, and then I like eating bread that other people have baked.
On your website, it says humans have been baking bread for 10,000 years. Like, what do we still not know? What questions are you trying to answer?
Yeah, well, it's funny because it's the things that we interact with on a daily basis that we assume we know a lot about. And so since we assume that someone already has the answer, we don't ask the questions, or we assume that we just don't have access to the answer. In a lot of cases, we just don't know. So sourdough is one of those places where there's so much history, and there's a huge community of people who are really passionate about baking bread and keeping their starters. But from an ecological perspective, they're also this ecosystem in a bottle, literally. And it's a great way to start studying how communities form and how microbes and organisms enter a system and how they interact, and how what humans do can impact how those organisms interact with each other. And it seems like something very simple that we should know, and there's still a lot of mystery around it.
So what Lauren's lab is asking we the people to do is make some of those ecosystems in a bottle ourselves. We're going to harness the bacteria and the yeast floating wild in the air around us for science. The same microbes that make the wild starter wild and sourdough sour. This has been a project I've been participating in for weeks now. 2 weeks to be exact. The project only requires that participants make one starter, but I'm an overachiever, so I made two. One indoor and one outdoor, so that the scientists at North Carolina State could compare the difference. Let's look back a fortnight and a haircut ago, back to the beginning of my contribution. Okay, I'm ready to go, but it's not day one of the experiment yet. It's not even day 0, it's actually day -1, I guess, because before we can start, I need to dechlorinate some water. A lot of tap water in the United States has chlorine gas dissolved into it, which kills harmful bacteria, which for drinking water is great, but when we're making a sourdough starter, we want bacteria to live in our starters. So it wouldn't be great for our purposes to put water straight from the tap into our starter. Luckily for us, chlorine gas evaporates pretty quickly. So all you need to do is the day before you start, put out a glass of water, and by the next day, you can be confident that it's fully dechlorinated. Also, it might be helpful if you leave a note. And now we wait. Okay, we're at day 0. It is time to start our starter. I have my dechlorinated water that's been sitting out overnight. I have my flour. I have 1 mason jar for my outdoor starter. I have 1 mason jar for my indoor starter. I have 2 napkins and 2 rubber bands, 1 for each starter. I have my measuring spoons, and I have masking tape and a marker for labeling. Into each of my jars is going to go 2 tablespoons of identical flour. And now each of them get 2 tablespoons of dechlorinated water. And now we mix the contents of each into a thick paste. Now we use our napkins to make makeshift lids. So these guys are going to ensure that like debris or any insects or big particles don't get into our starter, but it will allow tiny bacteria and microbes that we want to pass through. It's a semi-permeable membrane. So we have 2 identical sourdough starters, and what we need to do now is label one of them so we know which one stays outdoors and which one gets to stay here. Do you think this one looks more like an indoor or an outdoor starter? I'm so excited. You get to chill right here. I'm going to take you outside. So in looking for places for your outdoor starter, you want to make sure that it's out of the elements. You don't want it to be in like direct sunlight, or you don't want it to get like rained on. So I have this little covered porch. I think this guy's gonna live out here for a while. He's beautiful. And now we wait 24 hours.
In collecting data through community science, why did you choose to kind of outsource that? What benefit do you get from people all over the world contributing?
Well, there's so much experiential knowledge out there. I mean, we're experts on microbes, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert in bread baking or maintaining. I've maintained a couple starters, but many starters are different from each other. And many people in the world have had more experience maintaining their starters than I have. And so we get to harness the questions that people have and the knowledge people have, and together use all of our expertise to create new knowledge. An individual sourdough can only tell us so much about that one sourdough, but if we get enough samples from around the world, we can start to get a sense of how climate and geography can impact the rise and aromas of sourdough. The rise and the aroma are sort of an indicator of what sort of species might exist in your starter.
Okay, so it's officially day one of the experiment. My outdoor jar has been sitting outside for 24 hours. My indoor jar has been sitting right here for 24 hours. And now we have to feed our starters. Before we start to feed, we have to take out 1 tablespoon of the starter. We do this because if we don't discard any of the starter, it'll grow exponentially and we'll have like far more of it than we need. You know, God knows we don't need any more exponential growth in our lives. The instructions say to smell the starter to begin to train our noses. It smells like exactly what you'd expect, but it is only day one, so we'll see how this changes. I'm gonna scoop out a tablespoon of the starter, and then you can discard that or put it in your compost pile. And then we replace that with 1 tablespoon of the dechlorinated water, and then add an additional 4 teaspoons of new flour. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'm gonna put these lids back on, and I'm going to return these mason jars to where they were hanging. And I repeat this step for the next 14 days. See you tomorrow. Day 2. I'm filming this in the winter time, and so it's a lot colder outside than it is inside, and I wonder if that's going to affect the growth of bacteria in my outdoor starter. It still smells just like flour and water, but maybe a little milder than yesterday. I feel like fewer bacteria are gonna grow in the one that's cold because it's like natural refrigeration. The indoor one's starting to smell, I think, a little different. Like it smells like pizza dough, which I know is just like flour and water, but it's starting to smell like there's more than just. It smells like pizza dough, is how I can describe it. Add back in our tablespoon of water. Again, each mason jar gets 4 teaspoons of flour. 1, 2, 3. We're running low on flour. 4. Put our lids back on. I'm gonna put this one outside and I will see this one tomorrow. Day 3, you know the drill. Okay, again, it continues to stay the same. I think because probably not a lot of bacteria are growing here because it's so cold out. Gross.
I'm going to interrupt you because I'm really curious. What's it smell like?
I'm in the Northeast, so it's pretty cold. So the outdoor one was not super productive, but my indoor one reeked. It smelled like, I used to own a cat. It smelled like cat urine. I'm confident there's no cat urine in my starter, but like it smelled pretty bad for a while. But then as it matured, it got a lot more tolerable. Now it smells kind of sweet and like, it smells almost like bready.
That's awesome.
What does it mean?
It means that you probably had some body-associated microbes for the first chunk of the period, which is kind of gross to think about, but eventually the lactobacillus bacteria were able to outcompete them, and then the yeasts, which are acid tolerant, were able to continue to grow. So you got the beautiful classic transition from like gross microbes to the more classic sourdough odors that you'd want to look for.
I definitely wouldn't call that a yummy smell. Is it like ammonia? Like, no, it's not like ammonia. It's like urine, like cat urine. Science? I'm gonna have to wash my hands pretty heavily after this. You stay here. I'm gonna bring you outside. You know the drill by this point. Day 4. Our outdoor one still smells like exactly what you'd expect flour and water in a paste to smell like. Oh, whatever that is, it does not smell good. It's moments like this where I think you should really just appreciate that smell-o-vision is not a real thing. Outdoor starter, I love you because you don't smell horrific. Indoor starter, if this is what it's going to be like for the next 10 days, so be it. Day 5. God, it's down to a science at this point. My outdoor starter still smells like flour and water, which I love. I love. Because I know I'm about to subject my nose to whatever is inside here. Okay, I will say it still smells like bad, but it is not as offensive. I don't know if it's because I'm becoming acclimated to it or because it's actually getting better. But online in the instructions, it says that it takes a while for the microorganisms to like find their equilibrium and really balance out. So maybe that stench was the result of something being kind of out of whack. You know, maybe I'm hoping that it's starting to return back to some sort of healthy equilibrium. It's still not good. You can tell this one is definitely like airier. Something is producing gas in here. It's fluffy, it's less dense. The lab at North Carolina State that runs this project has an odor wheel on their website where you can use the words that are on that wheel to describe the odor of your starter. I'd say this one definitely aligns with urine, but there were options there that were like mixed berries, like pineapple, banana, floral, vegetal, like all these like delicious sounding odors. And every time I read it, I go, why can't you be like that?
I spent a lot of time looking at the scent wheel, especially because my starter was so horrid and I was so envious seeing that it was possible that it could have smelled like fruits and like berries and apples and all these delicious smelling things, and mine was very much not that. Do some starters actually smell like that? Is my envy like justified?
That's a really good question. So the sourdough wheel was generated in collaboration with some folks who have a lot more experience with the breadth of aromas in sourdough. And so they wanted a tool that people could use very similar to the one that people use for like wines. And so I suppose it is possible that those aromas exist. I personally have not had the pleasure to smell an apple-scented sourdough.
Well, I wish for you someday that you get to smell like a delicious apple-scented starter.
Okay, again, we're getting better. It's still bad, but it's improving. 2, 3, 4. I wonder if there's like any risk of contamination, even having them this close to each other, or just even bringing the outdoor one inside to refresh it. Okay, day 7. We're halfway done. Our outdoor one, which has been refrigerated in the New Jersey winter, is yet to smell like anything but flour and water. There's still like a note of that heinous smell, but it's definitely starting to mellow out like a lot. It's starting to smell like a little like sour and not as disgusting a way. I think our starter's maturing.
Dr. Ann Madden and Rob Dunn, who's the PI for our lab, they went to Belgium and had bakers from all over the world sort of start starters at the same time using the same flour. And then they all went to Belgium and brought their starters and sequenced the microbes on their hands and the microbes in their starters to see how those bakers' own hand microbes were then affecting the microbes in the starter, which was really cool to be able to like look at. We thought that it would be the bakers affecting the sourdough. And one of the cool things we found was that the bakers don't seem to be affecting the starters as much as the starters are affecting the bakers. So bakers' hands look really different from other people's hands. They have the species of yeast and bacteria that you see in the starters in a much greater abundance than you see them in non-bakers' hands.
That's so interesting. I wonder like what bacteria and yeasts are in my starters that are now on my hands and vice versa.
Yeah.
Day 8. I don't know why I expect anything different with this one. This one's starting to smell like a little sweet even, like still like a little stinky BO smell. But like there's like a sweetness. I don't know what day it is at this point. This is starting to smell like it's starting to inch towards becoming a biotic starter. It has been a little warmer outside, so maybe that's why this one smells I don't know, I think it's starting to smell worse again. Only like 5 or 6 more days to go. The things I will do for bread. Our outdoor starter smells kind of like grassy. A vegetal note. It still has like a hint of like that like stench, like funky, but it's like starting to smell like sweet, like cotton candy, but like in a weird way. 1, 2, 3, 4. And here we are, back again at 14 days. And what a beautiful and wild 14 days it has been. I have experienced love, loss, truly every bit of the human experience. So now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take these to the kitchen. Welcome to my kitchen. Okay, so I have my outdoor starter and my indoor starter. They've been bubbling, toiling, troubling for 14 days at this point. It's day 15, which means that we finally get to collect data. Let's see, according to the recipe, when it is time to refresh your starter for the 15th time, rather than discarding a tablespoon of the starter as you usually do, transfer 2 tablespoons of your starter to a new jar. Do I have more than 2 jars is kind of a really important question. I'm just gonna use glasses and like pretend. So I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of flour and 2 tablespoons of water to each starter and mix thoroughly, scraping down the sides. This time the starter will be a little thicker than usual. Before I set it aside, it says to draw a line with a Sharpie on the jar to indicate the height of the starter. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to instead get a pencil and some sticky note. Before setting it aside, draw a line with the Sharpie on the jar to indicate the height of the starter. Using a ruler, measure the height of the starter from the base of the jar. This is your baseline height. Every few hours, check on your starter and indicate the height with a new mark. Ideally, this would be every 3 hours. If you set it up in the evening, it is okay to leave it overnight. Just check on it first thing in the morning. Keep checking on your starter every few hours until it is no longer growing in size. Measure the height of the highest mark from the base of the jar. This is your high tide mark. Okay, I think I'm gonna leave them overnight because it's late and I'm sleepy. And now I go to sleep. When I wake up in the morning, the first thing I'll do is check and record the heights of the starters. Good morning again. The sourdough has been rising overnight, which means that now we get to collect data. First, let's measure the high tide marks on each of the glasses. 1 and 5/16 of an inch on the indoor one, and 1 and 3/16 of an inch on the outdoor one. And the cups both have a 2-inch diameter at the base. Now that I know that, all I need to do is go to the Wild Sourdough Project's website. The link is in the description. And input all my data into their form. They ask about what type of flour I used, what temperature it was in my house, and what odors I noticed in each of the starters. So be sure to have all that info on hand. Once you've submitted that, you've technically made your entire contribution to the project. But to come so close to having fresh homemade sourdough and then stopping there would be lame. So we're making bread. We are going to be making bread. Making bread. Today we are working on our indoor starter. It's so airy. If I lift the you can see that there's like all these like bubbles. It smells yeasty and sweet, and is that bacteria? So we're going to need 3 2/3 cups of all-purpose flour. You mix the flour and the salt together, and then the water and the starter separately. And you combine them all in a bigger bowl. You make a ball, and then you allow that to like proof, I guess. So you will kind of like grease the bowl with the olive oil, and then you also grease the outside of your loaf with the olive oil, and you put it and you let it proof for 12-ish hours, which I'm just gonna do overnight, so when I wake up in the morning I can bake fresh bread first thing. Isn't that cute? Good night. Good morning. So our oven is preheating to 500 degrees. Our loaf has been proofing overnight. I do notice that it's gotten noticeably bigger. It smells sour. The sourdough smells sour. And as soon as that oven heats up, we're gonna toss it and score the top. It's gonna look like a real sourdough. That oven is preheated. It is getting toasty in here. Let's cook some bread. I sprinkled some oats on the inside so that it wouldn't stick to the pan entirely. So now we just have to like flip the bread. What's that? Spread a spatula around the outside. Top is scored. We put it in the oven. Bread's in the oven, we reduce the heat to 475 and then cook it for 20 minutes. Okay, it's the moment of truth. Is this not so beautiful? Oh, and warm. If I learned anything from the Disney Pixar movie Ratatouille, it's you have to listen to bread. Listen, is it the best sourdough I've ever had? No. But is it my sourdough?
What, if anything, have you learned so far?
So we actually haven't looked at this data yet. It's sort of one of those that I'm holding off as a treat to look at when I finish some other work, but we will shortly.
So you're saying there's still plenty of time to contribute data?
Yes, that is a good way to frame that. Yeah, we are still very much open to accepting new data. I think at some point we will do a preliminary analysis and then figure out what direction to take it next. Every time we answer one question, 10 other questions come up. And so then it's figuring out which avenue is feasible and exciting.
All in all, this has been a pretty good couple of weeks. I contributed to a unique community science project and got fresh baked bread out of it. It's a great project, especially for the wintertime, because you never have to go outside in weather like this. If you want to participate too, the link to the Wild Sourdough Project is in the description below, with instructions and tips and recipes. I couldn't recommend it more.
I think for me, more than being just excited about sourdough, I'm excited about the idea that there are questions in our everyday activities that haven't been answered, and for people to be curious. If they're not exactly curious about sourdough starters, that's fine. You can be curious about something else. And the chances that we don't actually know the answer are pretty high. And I think that's something I didn't know when I first got into science. I felt like it would be really hard to carve out some area of science that we hadn't explored yet. And that's not true. There's so much we don't know.
Thank you so much for watching iSci. If you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, $0, and it helps us to continue to spread the love of curiosity in science. While you're at it, feel free to check out our previous episode, where we put together a community project on iNaturalist that already has over 2,000 observations. You all blow my mind. Until next time, remember, I science, you science, anyone can do science. Now I've got some bread to eat. If there's one thing that's the same in between YouTube videos and the character of Kevin McAllister in Home Alone, it's that everyone always on the front cover is like